Hello, and welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be reading you a true crime story called Blue Mist number 22 from the True Crime Case Histories book, volumes 4 to 6. If I do pronounce any names wrong, I do apologize. On a snowy January morning in 1972, 8-year-old Shelley Michelson grabbed her coat and walked with a friend from her 4th grade classroom to Marshall Elementary School toward her home in Flagstaff, Arizona. Like any other day, her mother expected her home for the lunch hour, but before Shelley made it past the baseball field between the school and her home, a familiar green Chevy Chevelle pulled up beside them. It was her neighbor, 23-year-old Roberta Maude Moorman had received treatment for an intellectual disability and worked bussing tables at a nearby restaurant. He lived with his mother just a few blocks away from the Michelson home and was known by Shelley's family. Earlier that week, he had been to their home to ask what toys Shelley liked so he could buy something for her. Moorman rolled down his passenger side window, called to Shelley, and told her that he was there to take her to lunch. "It's okay with your mom," he lied. Shelley had no reason to not trust him, got into his car, and the two drove off as the other girl continued her walk home. It didn't take long for Shelley's mom to know something was wrong. As soon as she didn't show up for lunch, her mother called the school. One of the school officials had seen Shelley getting into the car, but thought nothing of it at the time, as Moorman was known by the school staff as well. When she reported Shelley missing, a full-scale police manhunt was initiated, and the media were immediately alerted. That evening, the story of the kidnapped girl was the lead story on the local television news channels. Backtracking Moorman's movements, police learned that earlier that day he had asked for $10 advance on his paycheck at the restaurant and cashed a $5 check at a local bank. He then borrowed a .22 pistol from a friend. At a local gun shop, he pawned 2 rifles for $60 and purchased ammunition for the handgun. Late that evening, a motel manager in the tiny town of Ash Fork, Arizona, called the police. He had seen on the evening news that Moorman was wanted for kidnapping. The news piece showed photos of him, the young girl, and his green Chevy Chevelle. Although he hadn't seen Shelley, the motel manager recognized Moorman and the car. Moorman had checked into the motel using his real name and had told the manager that he was staying there with his niece. Police instructed the motel manager to quickly move his own car behind Moorman so he couldn't leave. By the time he got off the phone, Moorman had disappeared with the girl. Moorman had seen the same nightly newscast. When police arrived and entered the motel room, all they found was the baseball hat he had been wearing earlier in the day, a section of rope, and pawn tickets for the 2 rifles. Moorman had taken the girl to another motel near Kingman, Arizona. The next night, they continued north to yet another motel in Lake Mead, on the border of Arizona and Nevada. Police and FBI, meanwhile, went from motel to motel throughout northwest Arizona, but just missed him at every step. The following morning, Moorman was frustrated. He was running out of options and knew the police were on to him. It was only a matter of time before he would be apprehended. His frustration escalated when his Chevelle broke down on the side of the road. Furious, he got out and started walking away, leaving the young girl alone inside the car. January in northern Arizona is well below freezing. He knew Shelley would freeze to death in the abandoned car, but Moorman couldn't take Shelley's cries, eventually turning back and letting her out of the car. He took her by the hand and put his thumb out and walked with her down the side of the frozen highway. Although he felt sorry for the girl, he pitied himself more and wanted out of the stupid situation he had gotten himself into. If they didn't get someone to pick them up, Moorman's intention was to kill the girl and dump her body on the side of the road. Mr. and Mrs. Swanson were traveling the country in their motorhome when they saw Moorman and Shelley on the side of the road and offered them a ride. Shelley was cold and shivering. The couple could tell from her red eyes that she had been crying. Miss Swanson made them both food in the back of the motorhome as Mr. Swanson drove north toward Las Vegas. When Shelley had finished her food, Miss Swanson laid her on the bed in the back and told her to get some rest. When she returned to the front of the motorhome, Moorman had removed the bullets from his pistol, set it on the table, and asked if they had a drawer he could store his gun in. As they drove toward Las Vegas, the Swansons successfully persuaded him to surrender to the police. Moorman agreed, and Mr. Swanson drove to the nearest police station. Robert Moorman walked into the Las Vegas police station and placed his handgun and a pair of handcuffs on the desk in front of the desk sergeant. "I'm wanted for kidnapping a little girl," he said. The officer asked where the girl was, and Moorman pointed below the edge of the officer's high desk. When the officer peered over his desk, he saw Shelley Michelson. Except for some light rope burns, Shelley seemed to be physically unharmed, and the Michelson family thought the horrible ordeal was over. When questioned by police, however, Shelley told them that she had been molested by Moorman. It was far from over for Robert Moorman, who faced kidnapping charges and was returned to Arizona. Moorman had come to the attention of Flagstaff police in the past, but had never been arrested. Their first encounter with young Robert was when he accidentally shot and injured his mother. The second occasion was when he set their house on fire. Again, his mother covered for him and told police it was an accident. When he was 16, police were called to the Moorman house after he had used rope to tie up an 8-year-old girl, claiming they were only playing cowboys and Indians. Moorman was released without charges. His mother wasn't going to be able to get him out of the kidnapping charge, though. During questioning after the kidnapping, Shelley Moorman denied molesting the young girl, claiming he had blacked out and couldn't remember anything like that happening. He admitted that he intended to kill Shelley. He also initially intended to kill the Swansons, but when asked why he didn't, he replied, "Because they were nice to me." Moorman's lawyer argued that he was mentally disabled and didn't understand the charges against him, but two psychiatrists provided by the prosecution disagreed. After examining him, both psychiatrists found that he was indeed mentally sound and able to stand trial. His intelligence deficiency is so slight as to not be classified as mental retardation. Both psychiatrists agreed that Moorman was neither a sociopath nor a psychopath. His only illness was a predilection for young girls. Although he had been prescribed medication to control his sexual appetite, Moorman had stopped taking it days before the kidnapping. The judge agreed with the psychiatrist and concluded that Moorman was competent enough to stand trial and fully understood the charges against him. In June 1972, Moorman pled guilty to the kidnapping charge. Before his sentencing, he gave a brief statement expressing his remorse and asked for another chance to begin a new life. But despite his plea, Moorman was sentenced to 9 years to life in prison. Robert Moorman was born Robert Bobby Conger in 1948. His biological mother was just 15 years old when she gave birth. She had been working as a prostitute, which left the identity of his father unclear. When his mother was 17, she broke her neck and died in a car crash. 2-year-old Robert was handed over to his grandparents, but life with them was no better. His grandfather was a violent, abusive alcoholic, and Robert was inevitably sent to foster care. Eventually, he was adopted by the Moorman family just before his 3rd birthday and renamed Robert Moorman. His adoptive father, Henry Moorman, was a successful businessman and ran a well-known taxi service in the Flagstaff area. By the time he was 5 years old, however, his adoptive father had passed away, and Robert was left to be raised alone by his adoptive mother, Roberta Maude Moorman. Growing up in Flagstaff, Moorman was a chubby boy who wore large, thick glasses and spoke in a childlike voice. Making friends was difficult, and the other kids called him slow or retarded. Relatives would later say that his mother was the only real friend that Robert ever had. Maude Moorman insisted that Robert wasn't retarded, but only a slow learner in book matters. He had successfully completed high school and a course at a barber school. However, when he couldn't find work as a barber, he enrolled in another course to become a hospital orderly. His mother claimed that before the kidnappings, Robert had never done anything violent in his life. Maude supported her son and stayed by his side all throughout his life, including during his incarceration. For 11 years, she took a bus more than 200 miles every month to visit her son in Florence, Arizona, a small town about an hour south of Phoenix that was home to the state prison. In January 1979, after serving only 7 years in prison, Moorman was paroled. However, his freedom didn't last long. He quickly returned to prison after he violated parole for possessing a weapon back in the Florence prison. Maude Moorman continued her routine of taking the bus regularly to visit her son. Throughout the years, Moorman continued to apply for parole, but was repeatedly denied. In lieu of parole, however, the prison had a program called compassionate leave, in which well-behaved prisoners were granted temporary leave outside of the prison walls for short periods of time. Moorman had spent his time in prison being obedient and productive, so in 1983 was allowed compassionate leave 3 times. He used each opportunity to meet his mother for 72 hours at a time. On Thursday, January 12, 1984, Robert Moorman was granted compassionate leave a 4th time. He was allowed through the prison gate and walked to the Blue Mist Motel, just a quarter mile west of the prison. It was a small mid-century motel known for its bright blue paint. It resembled something straight out of an old movie, with the motel doors opening directly to the parked cars and gated outdoor pool. As she had in the past, Maude Moorman was waiting for him in room 22. Just before 7 a.m. the next morning, Moorman walked to a nearby convenience store where he purchased a folding buck knife, a steak knife, and some food. On his walk back to the motel, he stopped by a pizza parlor that was owned by a former prison guard that he knew. He told the owner that he was on furlough visiting his mother at the motel, and they planned on coming back that evening for dinner, but she wasn't feeling well. When Moorman returned to the Blue Mist Motel, he stopped by the office and spoke to the owner. He told Mr. Patel, who ran the motel with his wife, that his mother wasn't feeling well and there was no need to clean the room that day. As he left the office, he ran into Miss Patel, who usually cleaned the rooms. Moorman told her that the room had a strange smell and asked to borrow some disinfectant spray. However, Miss Patel handed him the spray. She noticed that it was Moorman that smelled putrid. He also seemed to have spots on his face that looked like tiny drops of blood. Later that morning, as Miss Patel cleaned the adjacent rooms, she noticed that Moorman had dropped several dirty towels outside the door. As she picked up the towels, she noticed they smelled worse than he did. The towels were ruined. There was no way that smell was coming out. Rather than wash them, Miss Patel threw them in the trash. Later that afternoon, a friend of Maude's stopped by the hotel room looking for her. Marianne Southworth lived in Florence and visited with Moorman's mother every time she came down to see her son. When Robert answered the door, however, he claimed that his mother had gone to lunch and he wasn't sure where she was. Marianne thought it was odd that Maude's purse was clearly visible on the table in the room. Even stranger was the temperature of the room. Despite the cold January afternoon, the air conditioner was running full blast. Later that afternoon, Moorman asked Mr. Patel if the dumpster behind the motel would be picked up in the morning. He explained that his mother had brought some meat with her from Flagstaff, but it had spoiled and he needed to get rid of it. Mr. Patel, however, explained that the garbage wasn't due to be picked up until the following Monday, 3 days later. That evening, Moorman asked the owners of the pizza parlor and a nearby liquor store if he could use their dumpster to get rid of cow guts that a friend had given him. It was an odd request to say the least, and both business owners refused. The pizza parlor owner had worked in the prison and was familiar with Moorman. He could tell that Robert looked nervous and worried. He knew something was wrong. On a hunch, he called the Florence police, who checked in on Moorman at 10:30 p.m. The officers knocked on room 22 of the Blue Mist Motel and told Moorman that they had heard that his mother was not feeling well and they were there to check on her. Wearing only a pair of unzipped pants and a belt, Moorman explained that his mother had left around 6 p.m. that evening with a Mexican woman, and he didn't know where she was. telling them I'm getting worried about her because she didn't take her medication with her. When the officers asked why he was trying to get rid of cow guts, he replied, "A friend gave them to me, but I got rid of them. I just flushed them down the toilet." Before the officers left the motel, they peeked into the dumpster behind the motel to make sure Moorman wasn't lying. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but they felt he was hiding something. The officers then drove to the prison to ask the guards for a description of Miss Moorman. Late that night, Moorman was troubled. He really needed to get rid of that meat. Moorman called the prison and spoke to a guard he knew, claiming he had 25 pounds of dog bones that he thought the prison dogs would like. The prison guard thought it was strange, but agreed to help him. He showed up at the motel a few minutes later with his truck, took the box of bones, and drove back to the prison. Not long after the guard arrived back at the prison, he received a phone call from the officers that had spoken to Moorman earlier that evening. When they mentioned that Moorman's mother was missing and Moorman had been acting suspiciously, the guard told them about the box of bones he had just picked up. When the officers arrived at the prison and opened up the box, they found trash bags filled with bones, but the officers thought they were too big to be dog bones. They believed they were human. The officers took the box and drove to the hospital, where medical staff would know for sure. While they waited for the results, the officers drove back to the motel and found Moorman using the payphone near the office. As he walked from the payphone back to his room, they told him they would wait there with him until his mother arrived home and suggested that he wait with them in the squad car. The three of them sat in the car for over an hour until two officers from the prison arrived and parked next to them. The results had come back from the hospital, and the bones were indeed human. Moorman was handcuffed and said to the officers, "I wonder if I need a lawyer. I'll leave it up to you guys whether I need a lawyer." When police entered room 22 at the Blue Mist Motel, the bath towels, bedding, bathroom walls, tub, and bathroom floor were all covered in blood. A buck knife, a steak knife, and a scouring sponge still had human tissue on them. Strangely, his mother's bra hung in the closet with $500 in cash pinned to it. Although there was no question he had butchered his mother in the room, there was no sign of her body. It didn't take long, however, to find her remains. In a dumpster behind the motel, police found Maude's head, torso cut up in two pieces, feet and hands. Each were wrapped in plastic bags. The hands were missing their fingers. They also found the packaging for the knives, a pair of his mother's pajamas, and a razor. Another bag was filled with random bits of muscle, skin, and tissue. Only one finger was recovered from the sewer. In Moorman's personal belongings in his prison cell, they found a notebook with odd writings such as instructions on how to train a dog to make deposits at a bank. However, investigators were most concerned with a document entitled Last Will and Testament. Maude Moorman had already written a will that left everything to her son, but her assets totaling approximately $200,000 were to be put into a trust in his name. He would only have access to the interest it created. She didn't believe he was mentally or physically able to handle that much money all at once. Robert didn't like the idea and had drawn up an amendment to the will. His amendment would have put the assets into a company called RHM Enterprises. RHM Enterprises, however, didn't actually exist, and his mother hadn't signed the will. The amendment was dated January 13th, the day he murdered her. When Moorman arrived at the police station, he told detectives, "You can change the charge. She's dead." He told police that he lost his cool when his mother asked him to take his father's place and do things I couldn't handle. He claimed that his mother had forced him to have sex with her ever since he was a child. My mom and we had an arrangement, and during it I hit her a few times, and then it got worse, and I lost my cool, and I tied her up, and she kept on me, talking about things that pretended to pertain to my real family, and I don't remember the exact time, and I suffocated her. He explained that they were having sex, and he put a pillow over her face to suffocate her. Then I took the 409 cleaning spray and went into the washroom. I panicked, at which time I dissected her. A postpartum examination of what was left of Maude's body, however, showed no sign of sexual activity. No semen was found on the sheets or clothes. The medical examiner noted that the dismemberment was meticulous. He had cut her feet at the ankles, hands at the wrists, and fingers at the knuckles. Moorman told police that he had flushed 9 of her fingers down the toilet. One finger had rolled away as he cut it off, and he lost it. He later flushed that one too, which was found in the sewer. At trial, his lawyers again claimed that Moorman didn't know what he was doing and was mentally unable to understand the severity of his crimes. They argued that he had endured years of abuse from his adoptive mother, forcing him to perform sex acts on him which provoked his actions. But family members disputed his claim. By all accounts, his mother was loving and the best friend he ever had. The jury agreed and found that he was sane. The way he dismembered the body showed that he knew the difference between right and wrong. Moorman was convicted of first-degree murder and was sentenced to death on May 7, 1985. For 37 years, Moorman sat on death row awaiting execution, during which time his health deteriorated considerably. In the years leading up to his execution, Moorman suffered a stroke and received both an appendectomy and quadruple bypass. Despite several appeals, he was finally scheduled for lethal injection with only 2 days' notice. On February 29, 2012, Robert Moorman requested a double hamburger, French fries, 2 beef burritos, 2 14-ounce containers of Rocky Road ice cream, and 3 RC colas before his dose of pentobarbital because one of the drugs used for execution at the time had expired. His execution used only a single drug, rather than the standard 3-drug cocktail. His last words were an apology directed to the family of Shelley Michelson. I hope this brings closure and they can start healing now. I just hope they will forgive me in time. Thank you for listening. If you like this type of content, please consider subscribing and liking my channel, and I will see you on the next one.